Hey guys, my name is Terry and I'm a collectibles dealer. I'm a big fan of music, but I'm not an expert. That's why we've got Johnny D.
Yo, this is Kashif, and you're in the mix with Johnny D.
All right, Johnny, good to see you again.
Yes, what's going on?
I wanted to talk this week about collecting and record collecting and how it differs from maybe other collectibles. What are some of the intricacies or the things that are unique to collecting records? You mentioned that you got started collecting records just by going to hearing about different record stores and learning about the promos and kind of working your way up that way down up the scarcity chain or ladder until you eventually found test pressings and acetates. Can you talk a little bit about the early days of collecting and kind of the network of people? I mean, were you aware of other collectors or was it very solitary? Anything you could tell us about the early days of starting your collection?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I started collecting records in the 70s, and my sister's 6 years older than me, so she was a tremendous she was everything when it came to, I was listening to radio and stuff, but she was the major influence on me to, having that 6 year jump on me, and she was exposed stuff, and she was a smart music person. She wasn't, you know, the average white Italian American girl at that point would probably just say, I'm into Kiss or I'm into Elton John or whatever. She was all over the place. She turned me on to Chicago, Howard Melvin and the Blue Notes. She was all over the place, which was great. I think that she was, very, very a big part of my knowledge with music. But at the time, collecting records, you went over someone's house, everybody had their little spindle of 45s. And I never liked taking one out of my house. I always kept them in their jackets. But you'd have people that would have these little carry around things that would have them stacked and I would flip out. Like I thought that was the worst thing. But that was how that was the networking thing as a child. When I was older and I was able to go to stores by myself and the DJing thing came in, that's when you started seeing much more of people who use their records as tools, people who had to have two copies to play, people who had to have three copies, two copies to play, one to keep on the wall. That became a thing. And money's an issue. So it's though, even if they were just $3 a piece for a 12-inch single, if I had $6 on me, do I get two different records or two of the same? So there was a constant financial kind of struggle because when you're collecting music, I mean, I guess this applies to collecting anything, but especially with records that you can go somewhere and say, oh wow, I love 100 of these things right now. You'll never really have enough money to sat it's especially as when you're a child and you're younger, there's always going to be something that you want to get. So it's a constant, you're on a constant hunt. Every store you go in is going to potentially have that magical piece. And you would, when we had Charlie Grappone on the show, we were talking about the importance of the counter person. But for years before that, you had to have a person in the department. Most of them were just sent in the department to handle records and really didn't have knowledge. So if you didn't know the name of a song and you're humming, you don't even have a person to hum it to. You'd be lucky to have somebody at the place that you could say, I think it's this, it sounds like this, I don't know what that. So it was uh with the internet now, I look at how easy it is to just access music and Shazam and find out what things were. It was night and day, but it was fun. There was a challenge there. There were record conventions. As I got deeper into it, I met a lot of people. You met people who had record collections that were handed down to them from their older brothers or whatever, or a DJ from the neighborhood, or somebody throwing them out. Somebody lives in a building that they walked out of their house. There were 5 crates of records in front of their door. Somebody was just throwing them out. So records were all over the place.
Would you say the 12-inch was really important in terms of focusing your collection?
Yes, my collection, I mean, as a child, obviously I was more into the 7-inch 45s, and albums. I didn't even know what a disco 12-inch was. And when I found out about those and I was DJing, those became all I cared about. I really stopped paying attention to 7 inches and even albums because the quality on a 12-inch was so much better. You have one record on one whole side of, one song on one whole side of a record, the quality was so much better. And if you had a record that was only on an album and you were mixing it, you had to really make a lot of adjustments sonically to go from one to the other because you had a significant dip in bass and volume and highs and everything. And if a record on an album is closer to the end, that's even more of an issue. There were a lot of, I learned a lot of these things later on, making records and making music, to putting so much time on a side and cutting it at 45 instead of 33. There were all these little things you can do to kind of help um the quality of the records that you're making. So you'd get records, people would say, "Oh, I just want the import," because a lot of the imports were cut at 45 RPM, they had bigger grooves, and they just sounded better. Not all of them. Having said all of that, and I always say this to people, because in the digital world, like, oh, I have a digital copy of this. And I'm always like, if you have a garbage source, you're never going to get better than garbage. So, if you're at a 7, you can't bring it in the computer and make it a 9. There is technology to fix and get rid of pops and ticks and skip, but to actually make it better, it's hard. It's hard to do that. You lose. You bring the bass up, you lose some of the mids, the highs, all that stuff. You really need an engineer that really knows that to do that properly.
And what year would you say the 12-inch really made their debut?
Well, in like mid 70, 75, there were promos, very rare promotional copies floating around. I think 77 was the first commercial 12-inch, disco 12-inch was, I believe, My Love is Free double exposure. I haven't acetated that, by the way. That's the first commercial 12-inch disco single. And then from there, the companies went on. A lot of companies still did most promos. Like Warner Brothers was famous for just not putting them out. They just make them promotional for the clubs and push the album. There were a lot of companies that just wouldn't. Motown, those promos, I mean, go for $700-800 a piece to this day. They've always been very rare.
Do you remember, when you started getting some money and buying more records, who were the people who you were first comparing your collection to? Was it other DJs? Was it with people you met at Vinyl Mania?
Yeah, no, initially it was DJs because, I was in a neighborhood where there were so many DJs on every block. So you'd go to a block party or go to a club gig or a school dance. And I always, we knew each other. So you have that kind of access. You can go up to the stage or go into where the DJ is playing and go through their stuff. And I was always the guy that was concerned about clean records being clean and having the crazier piece, having the piece nobody else has. That was always a thing. There was always that little competition in it. I always talk about ego being a big part of it, and most people won't admit how much of a role ego plays in all of this. In collecting anything, it could be collecting posters, whatever. You could have a guy in your world that's like, oh, he's got, or whatever, the first comic, whatever it is, it's always going to be, I have this. So there's that bragging right thing. And I felt in the DJ world, that was a big thing. And remember, I came from graffiti as well, which was at the same time. And graffiti was, what's graffiti about? It's about being up. You want to be up as much. You want it to be that everywhere Terry goes, oh, that's what you want. That's what it's all about. I saw you here. I saw you on this train. You were on the bus. I went over here. You were at the, by the bridge. That's so it was really all about that. So I built the collection first and foremost because I love music, but the ego was a big factor of having the rare, crazy, the record nobody else has. That version that was a promo, didn't come out commercially. That was a big part.
Do you remember any moments where you said to yourself, okay, in terms of record collecting, now I've got that first moment where I've really differentiated myself from everyone else. I've got this crazy piece where I really feel like I'm pulling ahead of other collectors.
I think my collection, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was just the way I carried myself or whatever it was, but I've always had respect from my peers about even just from the beginning, the quantity, because I think they knew I wasn't a junk collector. I would leave more stuff than I would take almost all the like I wasn't looking just to say I have a lot of records. It was about when you went through my records, there was no filler in it. I always say I have a fat-free collection, and I collect it. I still to this day collect that way. I always feel that if someone comes in the room, there should be some kind of a branch, there's some kind of a tie to that. Or even if you don't like Aretha Franklin, you have to acknowledge that, oh, wow, he's got like six Aretha Franklin test pressings, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, but I mean, in your collection, you've got these incredible pieces now that are, some people in other collectibles categories would call grails, or
Oh,
like
oh,
pieces that are.
oh, today, absolutely. I mean, today, I mean, yeah, I would
So,
say,
so what I'm asking you is, do you remember the first time that you achieved a piece that you felt like you could show to other people and it would blow their minds?
um, yeah, but you know what the funny thing is, I really didn't show a lot of these pieces to a lot of people. Like I was very, um, like my Madonna, the first album, like I don't even know how many of my friends have seen that. I wasn't really that guy. They know I have them, but I'm not necessarily like, hey, let's take it out. Like I wasn't, which is, I guess there are certain people that would be like, oh, I guess if it's, you have it graded in a PSA card form, it's much easier to just pass the thing around. But do I want somebody to even touch my record? So maybe that's in the back of my head, where I really don't want people touching my stuff. So,
No, no, and that's fair. I think I'm coming from a point of view where there are these forums online where people like to post, their winnings to kind of show them off as trophies.
oh
I don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
is the
Yeah.
equivalent of that like a Discogs, or are there other like forums where people show off rare acetates and test presses?
Yeah, yeah. A couple of months ago, it was funny. I went on a Prince page, and it was supposed to be a Prince collectible. Now I know I have the rarest Prince records in the world. I know I do, and I've seen stuff. There was an auction that went off last year, and for $58,000, there was a Prince reel to reel, which was his demo before he was even signed to Warner Brothers, and I think there were 13 in existence. No hits on it. It sold for 58,000. So I say to myself, okay, if that's worth 58,000, let's call it 60,000. The self-titled album with I Want to Be a Lover, Acetate, one made, it's got to be double that. It, a minimum, it's got to be double that. Like I just, and the press kit and everything else. But you have to say, worst case scenario, that's got to be double that. First of all, you can't even play the reel. Who's going to have a reel? And those reels will disintegrate. Yeah, there's a baking process if you want to play a reel. It's more of a headache than anything else. The record you could actually play. Then if you were using that mentality, how much more important is the Purple Rain test present? Is it 10 times that? Is it $1 million piece? It's hard without something being in the marketplace to give it a value. I know in the auction house, when it comes to cards or Babe Ruth gloves and balls and even the posters, there are tremendous runs. Babe Ruth signed thousands of things. Mickey Mantle, thousands of things. So yeah, you could say, I have a Mickey Mantle baseball. What's it worth? And you can Google it. You can go to a PSA site. Oh, PSA, SGC, whatever. We've had a Michael Jackson. We have a Mickey Mantle that sold for 75,000. Oh, this one says Mickey Charles Mantle. Oh, this one has his stats on it. There's a reference. The problem, or not gonna say it's a problem, but the crazy part of my collection is I'm the reference. So it's hard for me to say, hey, look, I'm great. Let me tell you, I'm great. And well, you want to Google how great I am, you're not gonna find it because there's no I'm the reference. So it's kind of a weird thing to be. And a lot of the pieces that I've collected, these grail pieces that I consider Smithsonian pieces, are just that. I mean, I don't see how you put a value on a Thriller acetate. It's the biggest selling album in the history of music. So you could sit back and we have this discussion all the time about the Butcher cover of the Beatles selling for $750,000. That's great. There's thousands of those.
Well, let me just jump in. I don't think the Butcher cover sold for $750,000. I think that was the cover of the White Album that was owned by Ringo, right? I think
Oh, okay,
that
that was the ring. Oh, yeah,
you
okay.
you know,
So,
I,
but
I
even that, even that, but the White Album. The Butcher cover. When I speak to different people from places, they always seem to bring that up as this grail,
yes, yes,
and I'm not debating that, but there are an unbelievable amount of those in the market.
it's not scarce. There are a lot of them,
Not
and
scarce, and it's
totally,
and I had a discussion years ago with someone at one of the auction houses where I was talking about the Thriller, and they said, "Yes, I agree with you. This is arguably the most important, most valuable record ever." However,
absolutely,
but what I was doing, I was comparing it to a 52 mantle, saying how, I had a 52 mantle, and obviously now it just got beat out by the Jordan Kobe card the other day. But for, that's always been the card, and there are thousands out there. And the guy said to me, he goes, "Yes, but this is the thing with the mantle, the comparison to the Thriller. Anybody can buy a mantle 52. You can get a beat up one, and you can get a PSA 8, if depending on your financial situation." He goes, "The Thriller, once you sell that, that person may never sell it, and that's it forever. So that Thriller's gone."
yeah.
And now for me, that's sexy. See, that's, as a collector, I think that's much sexier than the 52 mantle, because
I
there are a
totally
lot.
agree. A couple comments I'd make is one, I think sports cards are the exact wrong comparable to be comparing these music collectibles to. I
Yes.
think a much better comparable for the acetates and the test presses is something like concert posters, where on the one hand you have these posters that have tremendous runs, like the Bill Graham or the other series of posters where they made thousands and thousands of copies of them, and people are all concerned about condition. And you could see some of these, high grade copies of a BG 105, which is a Jimi Hendrix poster, or an FD 26, which is a Grateful Dead poster. High grade copies of those that are graded by a company like CGC, or just graded by someone looking at it saying it's a mint copy. Those can go for six figures, even though there are thousands of those made. But when you look at the one-off concert posters, I'm talking about the boxing style ones where, maybe there's one known copy, two known copies, or a small stash, and that's all there is. And it's impossible to find one when you want to buy one. You can't just, you could go to Mark Zuckerberg and say, this guy can't put together a collection of these one-off posters because you just can't find them,
Yes.
and they cost whatever anyone's willing to sell them, is willing to sell them for. So, just I think that's a great comparable for your, or a better analogy for rare acetates and test presses. I mean, could Mark Zuckerberg put together your collection of acetates and test presses? And the answer is no. Even though he has all the money that you could want,
Yes.
it would be impossible for him to put together a collection like yours,
Well,
unless.
and that was, as I was putting this together, and as I really started to build in a big way, I always felt that, you go buy a piece of property, you go build a house, right? And you build a house, and they're like, "Okay, it's going to be $500,000. Oh, but we're going to hit you for that upcharge on the lot, the plot, another 50,000 for the plot," which is a joke. I always felt that if there was a one-stop shopping situation with me, for me to sell this stuff, if a person were to take all of this stuff in, you have to add, in addition to how ridiculously rare these things are, it's in one shot. So if someone comes in, it's not like, "Wow, I want to get into test pressings and acetates, and this guy has a nice start." But for me to now backtrack, I pretty much have the bases covered. So I feel there's an upcharge to that, to say it's a one-stop shopping. You can't, like you said, Mark Zuckerberg with all the money in the world. If you told him you need the Prince acetate if I want to be a lover, he can't, unless he comes to me. He doesn't have it.
No,
He
no,
can't
yeah,
readily
that
find
that's absolutely right. And I think I wouldn't describe it as an upcharge. I would describe it as you set the price because you're the only game in town. Like no one is getting these things unless you sell them, and that's tremendous pricing power. I mean, if someone wants it, the only way they can get it is for you to sell it. So you get to pick the price. You get to pick who the buyer is. The downside is it's a much more limited group of people, one, who can afford, who are willing to spend a sizable amount of money to acquire these rare things, but two, a lot of people who collect things nowadays are really more collector investors. And because the prices are so high, they can't just buy something as if it's, for fun, right? Like, or as a hobby. They have to keep it as an investment, in mind as an investment. And because of that, I feel like acetates and test presses have the same problem that rare concert posters have. And that's, they're not great investments from a purely financial decision because there are no comparables. So you're taking a lot of risk. I'm just trying to say that you get the glory of being the only one to have these things. Whereas, like you mentioned with a Mickey Mantle baseball card, there could be 1,000 guys who own a Mickey Mantle baseball card, 1,000 new guys who just come into the market and they all own this. But that can't happen with acetates and test presses or unique one-off items. And so it's kind of like there's a certain glory that comes along with really owning these one-of-one things. It's owning the best of something, the rarest of something. And whereas something that's mass produced like sports cards, it becomes a question of condition. Whereas for an item like an acetate and a test press, condition has nothing to do with it. There's only one of them. And the fact that you keep it in pristine condition is a bonus on top of it. But it really doesn't matter. I mean, if you want the only acetate of a legendary album that you love, you're going to take it regardless of what the condition is because it's the only one.
I mean, I've had certain test pressings, because a lot of them are written on, which I never really cared about. I mean, I love it if it's just blank, but they're written, it's whatever. And people will say, oh, there's a little initials on the test press label. I'm like, whatever, like that. I'm nutty about my promo labels, but the test pressing and acetate, I always said, however they come, they come. And however they got to me, there's always a weird journey of how they get around. That's another thing I found over the years. People that you would think would have this closet, they don't have them. Those aren't the people that have this stuff. These things wind up in the most bizarre, random places. And I've gotten crazy pieces in the most unlikely places that you would imagine. And but constantly being on the drive, you're always, the antenna is always up, wherever you go, a record store, this, that, whatever. Obviously, it's been much different lately. But I think the upside for the test pressing in the acetate market now is records became cool again in the last 10, 15 years. So now everybody's buying turntables and they're buying records and reissues and like Taylor Swift. I see a friend of mine sold 2 Taylor Swift albums for $1,500 each. They were $39 from like a Best Buy exclusive or something like that. And it's a very crazy thing to see how that market is. So anyway, I think that it's a healthy time for the records. I think that it's there's more people in the know now.
Absolutely. And I think, look, in some ways it trickles down a lot, like when there is a lot of excitement and influencers and athletes promoting sports cards and other collectibles, everyone becomes an art collector. And, people always are looking for ways to branch out. Sports card collectors maybe they look into comic books, maybe they look into posters, flyers, records. And everyone tries to find a way to be an individual and to curate their their collection to make it more personal. And I think that's great for all collectibles. People looking for nostalgia, people looking for rarity, scarcity. I think one of the things that really hurts one-off collectibles is precisely what you mentioned about how you didn't like to really show them off to anyone else. You like you just kind of kept them secret, and now that's changing. With this podcast, and
Yes.
you're kind of exposing to the world these things. But the downside of that is that up until now, there's been no ability for a market to form because there are a few people who have all of these things, and so it's not very liquid. And so that when a piece does come on the market, sure, you and a couple other guys are going to, know what the value is and the relative scarcity is and go after it. But let's say it's at an auction house that you and maybe one or two other guys miss and you don't see that it's available. I mean, it could go for an incredibly low price. If
Oh
you
yeah,
take,
I just saw an auction go off a couple of weeks ago, and it was criminal. It was disgusting. It was absolutely horrible. I reached out to the guy and told him I would have given you much more than what they went for. But that's why the auction thing is always tricky because you have an upside, but you have a downside there that it's a risk. If you don't have your reserves and stuff, you don't know where it's going to go.
but that's my point is that you put a Mickey Mantle 5 on eBay and there's virtually no risk that it goes for 50% of what it's worth because there are all these dealers and flippers and collectors who are willing to buy it at 20% less than they know they can resell
Yes.
it. And then 15%, and then 10%, 5%. And it gets pretty close to fair market value because, and if there's any meat left on the bone, people will just buy it and flip it, right? So,
Yeah, that's a scenario, but I've had the other scenario where I had a box of 30. I told you the story before. I had a box of 30 CDs and I put one up starting bid at 99 cents on eBay, and I put one up as a buy it now for 29.99. And I waited the week. Nobody bought the 29.99 buy it now. It went up to 62 or $63. There were five or six bidders. I did a second chance offer to the second, third, up to the five guys. So I sold them from 58 to $65 each, and the $29 one was just sitting there.
no, and that's all. It's always true that you can, hold a line in the water like you're fishing, and someone will come along and buy it. I mean, that's always true, but I think the point that I was making is that when you start an auction at $1 on a Mickey Mantle that's graded by PSA, you're going to get pretty close to fair market value if it's widely exposed, and it's it's kind of almost it's very difficult in a one-off collectibles market like rare concert posters or your acetates and test presses to make sure that it goes for its true fair market value without having the proper exposure. And so if it falls to a smaller auction house or one of the key people who are collecting it isn't aware of it, you could just have a situation where you get a comp in the market that's very low. That's
Yes.
the point that I was trying to make.
Yes.
What I was trying to get out of you is like a moment where you acquired something that really made you feel like your collection was starting to be filled with something really super special. Like I remember on eBay maybe 15 years ago, I bought one of my first hip hop concert posters, and it was a poster from a show that Biggie and Wu-Tang did in Los Angeles at the Sports Center. And the poster had been posted up on a fence across the street from a Roscoe's Chicken and Waffles on La Brea Avenue in Los Angeles. And someone had ripped it off the fence and put it on eBay. And I bought it for $300. And it's a fantastic poster. I've only seen one other one, and it's sold through a art gallery in New York for a relatively large price, and this was maybe 10 years ago. But I bought it for $300, and it's hosted by Bill Bellamy, and Faith
Yes.
Evans was on the Debrat was on the poster, and
Mm.
it's a great poster. And as soon when I started showing that off to people online, posting it in poster forums and stuff, I realized how scarce it was, and that no one else had it. And it just made me feel like I owned something that was really special. Was there a moment like that? I mean, I know you didn't share a lot of your things, but you must have known that there was something.
I remember that Madonna's first album, the test pressing, that was something that was like a joke. Like that was crazy. But what's funny? There's a record that I got when I got the Purple Rain test pressing. Before I saw that, I never saw it. I didn't know it existed. And I used to have in the back of my head, if that exists and I get it, I could stop collecting. Because that would really be wow. Because I don't believe it exists. And when it came up and I won it, I got it and I looked at it and I was just, I really, that's one that really kind of hit me because I had set that, thing in my brain that, I can stop now. Like I can't peak. I had the Thriller, I had this Madonna in the back of my head, Madonna, Michael, Prince. They've always had separate sections in my collection. So when you come to my walls and stuff, their stuff's not even in my room. I've always kept their stuff separately, always. Um, so that to me was the crazy piece. The funny thing is, last year I put up a picture of it, an image on one of these Prince pages. Now, you know, it's very, very hard to be me and to interact with other people who, let's just say, don't play nice because I'm not going to sit here and say this is the case if I'm not 1,000% sure. And some clown comes on and he had questioned, he saw the picture and he questioned the date or whatever. And he goes, well, test pressings are supposedly made 6 months before the release. And I started arguing with the guy. Then I realized I was wasting my breath. And I'm like, you have no idea when a test pressing is made. I do. I did this for a living. There's no 6 month. You could do it. There's no such thing. But this idiot is in a room with a bunch of Prince maniacs, and so his first thing is instead of being like, "Wow, you're incredible," he's gonna knock me down. That's his first thing because he thinks he knows. Then I have to school him, and then I'm mad that. Then I'm mad. I put the picture up. I showed it to them. I'm mad. I wasted my time. This person knows nothing. You know what I'm saying? And yeah, although those are made 6 months in it, like, no, they're not. Like, what
Yeah,
are you talking about? And unfortunately, those are the little maggots that are in all of this. When you collect, I used to go to record shows. I used to get turned off. I've told you in the past that people find out I'm looking for something. Some guy will get it just because he knows I want it, because he wants something from me. There's a lot of that. So I used to distance myself. I was very blessed to be close with the dealers. Record show would open at 10. I'd get there at 8 in the morning before the thing even opened. And I go see my people and I would scour the place, get my stuff. And then 10 o'clock, all the Japanese guy, everybody would come in and I had everything I needed. I went through, you know, 30,000, whatever it was. I would just spend 2 hours and do what I had to do, not to be at that level with these people, the pushing, the this, the that. I saw it first. I was going to grab it. I'm not going to do that.
definitely. As you get more mature as a collector, you have less time and less patience to deal with all the bullshit. And you know, I think it is kind of a mistake to attribute like bad behavior to a certain collecting, to a certain hobby group of collectors or a certain collectible. I just think it's human nature. I mean, I think
I
collecting
just
things.
think as a fan, as a music fan, first and foremost, before everything, before collecting, I love music. You're going to show me your posters that are going to show whether it's Grateful Dead craziness or a hip hop thing, whatever it is, as a music person, there's an appreciation. Even if I don't like Grateful Dead or hip hop, there's an appreciation. And when you explain to, it's like, wow, I'm so open. There are just people, the haters, that are instantly going to say, "Oh, I've seen that before." I told you one of the other stories when I was dealing with another auction house a couple of years ago when I was talking to them, and I brought up the Madonna. The guys, "Oh yeah, 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 I had that. I had that tattoo," and that was the end of it for me. That
Yeah,
was it.
I think my point is just that yeah, there. I mean, you got to be careful about who you spend your time with because I don't think that's specific to collectors. I just think people, you have a very good disposition about life that, if you can appreciate something, you're not going to hate all over it for a reason,
Yes.
it has nothing to do with music or anything else. That's
Yes.
just, I just think it's human. You're just a good person, like,
But jealousy is gonna play its part in all of
yes,
it. And
absolutely.
and I put up a post the other day. It was like, your enemies are in your circle. They're the ones who aren't cheering you on. They're not the people you think they are. They're the people that are the closest to you. So there is that. And that might have been something in the back of my head where I wasn't as, hey, look at me. Because it could be perceived that I'm just trying to brag.
No,
Uh,
that's right. That's right. And no one's perfect. I mean, we all have our shortcomings at certain moments of weakness. But I get your point, and I can understand why you would want to keep it close to your vest. I mean, a lot of clients I have absolutely have kept their collection close to their vest their whole time until they're ready to sell it, and they spring it on the world. And
yes.
I've had clients tell me that they don't disclose what they own because they don't want other collectors to poison their pieces when they come to auction. Or
Yeah, and these are all the things that unfortunately run through my brain. Everything you're saying is exactly without me even consciously know that's exactly right. You come as soon as you come out and say, "Hey, I'm Terry. I'm the poster guru." 10 guys are going to come right for your throat. No, you're not. Well, it's that's just what it is. And we're living in a time where because of this stupid thing, everybody has an opinion. And there's so much power in that phone to really take something off track. So you really have to be extra careful today. Whereas 1977, you're boasting that you have the biggest Elton John collection. Even if somebody wanted to take you down, how are they going to do it? Well, they're going to do it in their zip code.
it's interesting. In most of the collectibles segments that I've been involved, there have been enough material where even in the one-off collectibles, there was like a group of collectors who had enormous influence. It wasn't ever just one person. There were several, maybe as a small group, maybe 5 or 6 collectors who really controlled the bulk of the great stuff.
Yeah.
But in your situation, it honestly seems, I mean, and from what you've told me, it seems like you're a ways apart, even from the other guys who do have substantial amount of acetates and test presses, mainly because they're focused on one specific genre of music. Or just so I get this straight, there are really no other guys who have as broad musical selection
I,
of these
I, I,
acetates and test presses.
I mean, listen, it's, I don't want to sound like, an asshole, but I wish there was a second and third place I could refer to and say, you know what, these guys are holding on, whatever. I know a couple other guys more in the hip hop world that have a couple of pieces I'm interested in. I'm covering Barbara Streisand and Beastie Boys. Like I just don't know if you go into the B section of somebody else, you're gonna find Bee Gees, Acetates, Barbara Streisand, Beastie Boys. I just don't. I've I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone who collects that way with stock copies of records, let alone press pressings. I don't know somebody you can literally go and I mean, I'm looking at this wall now. It's from A to Z. I mean, it's like, I'm covering disco, hip hop, house, pop. It's all in there. And it's the important stuff. I really didn't I didn't um I didn't collect stupid. I'm a smart, if I have to pat myself on the back, forget about having great stuff. I'm smart with it. A lot of times people, one thing I'm very proud of is most times when any kind of record collecting comes up, people always refer to me. When what's his name? When Ozzy Osbourne died, I must have been hit by 30 people. Yo, when you gonna put up your Ozzy Osbourne test pressings? When are you gonna do that? So the respect is there. I've learned that other big names, people who have big names with this stuff, um, I go to their house and it's just quantity. It's a lot of junk. You'll see 60,000 records, and I'm like, not really impressed.
One of the things that I think I was fortunate um, was that in concert posters, like I mentioned, they're definitely, there's a small group of really heavy hitters who have incredible collections, and I got to know those guys, and I don't want to say I wasn't a threat, but like I was really interested in hip hop, and I really wasn't interested in the other stuff. And I don't know if I had been interested in the other stuff, it would have even been possible for me to make a dent, because these are guys like you who have just incredible collections, and starting out, just like we mentioned about Zuckerberg. I mean, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you just
Yeah.
can't get this stuff.
Yes.
But because they had no interest or knowledge or interest in the hip hop stuff, it was, once they had kind of like, you know, brought me in and kind of showed me how, all the different types of one-off posters and some of the histories of the companies that made these posters and what to look for. It was relatively easy because there weren't a lot of guys with that specialized knowledge in these one-off posters, and none of them were collecting the hip hop stuff. So in a relatively short period of time, and I'm
Yeah,
saying like
you were able to go in and just take it over.
the stuff was so cheap. Like I said, I bought that one poster for $300 on eBay when I started, and in about 10 to 15 years, I feel like I had, any poster that came across eBay, I was either buying it
Yeah.
or the underbidder, and
Yeah.
and if I was the underbidder, I knew the guy who bought it because he was a guy who was like
Yeah. It
a
was a,
a
yes.
buddy who was a competitor who you know but I was lucky to have like that group of guys who I could go and talk to and show things to, and friends in the hobby. And I'm wondering if you ever had that, like, uh, had someone who you could run your collection against, who you weren't worried that they were going to, use the information against you, or be jealous of what you had.
Yeah, I think of all of the people like Kenny, Kenny Dope, he and I always said if we put our collections together, we cover there is nothing better because he was a guy who was collecting break beats and some salsa and some Latin high-end stuff and very hip hop driven, where I was dance, disco, pop, and I have rap crazy pieces, but together I always said, he has a very impressive, smart collection. And he was one of the people that was, the same way when you were going and getting those posters, you were basically robbing them. It's a 7-inch single, 20 years ago. They were giving them away for 25, 30 cents. In the UK, they would do a lot of hip hop ones that would never come out in America, like in the 90s. So all of a sudden, Kenny was one of the people that decided, these are crazy rare. I'm gonna start playing these out. And he would go to like these record stores that a guy would have like, a box of stock copies that whatever. He just buy them all, 50 cents a piece. These things are going for two, 300 a piece now. And the 7-inch market is still on fire today. It's still in a lot of ways outperforming albums and 12-inch singles. And it was exactly like you just said about the posters. Nobody's paying attention to this lane. Acetates and test pressings. I was in that lane alone for a very long time. And I was camping out in that lane. And that was probably another reason subconsciously I wasn't trying to educate people to go after them the more people that go after them. Now, every time I'm on eBay or something, now I have all this competition. So
Yeah.
why would I want to do that? So it was almost like you're with that girl and you don't want to mess it up and you're just like keeping it to yourself. You go and tell 10 guys, it's that mentality. So that's probably more the reason why I kept everything closer.
Well, this is such a rich topic, and I'm sure we could revisit this and have several more episodes about
Yes.
it. But I hope you liked it, and I hope you join us again for more collectibles and stories from Johnny's collection. Thanks a lot.
Take it easy.